Several years ago, the big hubbub was about Poseidon Undersea Resorts, which was going to be this gorgeous, giant, sprawling undersea resort that kind of has fallen off the earth. We haven't heard anything about it in years, but it was impressive, to say the least. And this is basically a discussion about this proposed resort.
Welcome to Colonize the Ocean podcast, where we discuss oceanic colonization, exploration, and education with your hosts Adam Jewell and Brendan Traxler.
All right, so picture this. You're underwater, 40 feet below the surface, in your luxury hotel room, sipping on a martini, watching the fish swim by.
It's pretty nice, right?
Yeah, sign me up. Except for one problem, it doesn't exist.
Not yet, anyway.
Well, today we are diving deep into the Poseidon Undersea Resort, or at least the plans for it.
We're looking at this 2009 document that really tried to lay out all the technical details about how they were going to pull this off.
So they really thought they could make this happen.
Oh, they were serious. And what struck me right away is how they try to ground this whole kind of crazy idea in reality.
Okay, how so?
Well, they start by taking us way back, talking about the history of underwater engineering, starting with, you're not going to believe this, ancient Greek diving bells.
Diving bells, seriously.
I know, right? It's like they're saying, look, people have been trying to live and build underwater forever. This is just the next step.
I mean, I guess it makes sense. You got to start somewhere.
Exactly. And they even bring up the bathyscaphe Trieste, which went to the bottom of the Mariana Trench back in 1960.
Oh, wow, the Mariana Trench. That's like the deepest part of the ocean, isn't it?
The deepest. And they made a point to mention that the Trieste used acrylic for its viewports, the same material that they wanted to use for these huge underwater viewing domes in the Poseidon Resort.
So are they just trying to be like, hey, look, this material's been to the bottom of the ocean. It can handle a little luxury resort.
Pretty much. It's all about establishing that connection to existing tech, showing that it's not as far-fetched as it sounds.
Okay, I'll give them that. But building a luxury resort and a tiny metal sphere designed to survive like a bajillion pounds of pressure are two very different things. How are they actually going to build this thing?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Their whole plan revolved around this modular design. Imagine like a bunch of separate pods. Each one is a self-contained suite, and you build them all separately and then put them together underwater, like underwater Legos.
Underwater Legos. Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Right, and they actually compared it to how they build yachts nowadays using a technique called net part production.
Net part production.
Yeah, basically it means they build each section to incredibly precise measurements so everything fits together perfectly.
So no leaks.
No.
Oops, we forgot to bring the underwater sealant.
Exactly, they had it all planned out.
Okay, but even if you can build this thing, wouldn't it be a nightmare to maintain?
No.
I mean, salt water, constant pressure, not to mention keeping those giant windows clean.
All very valid concerns.
Oh.
But don't worry, they thought of that too. Apparently, they designed this whole automated cleaning system for the viewports to prevent stuff from growing on them.
An underwater Roomba for your window? That's kind of cool.
Right. And get this, each pod was designed to be detachable so you could bring it to the surface for any major maintenance.
So it's like a dry dock, but for your hotel room.
Exactly. They really did think of everything.
Almost makes you wonder why we aren't all sipping cocktails in our own personal Poseidon pods right now. You know, it's almost like they knew we were going to ask that because the next part of this document goes really deep into their safety protocols, especially for the tourist submarine.
Yeah, they made a big deal about meeting all the safety regulations, even using the American Bureau of Shipping Standards as their benchmark.
Which makes sense. I mean, they're asking people to literally live underwater for their vacation. So, got to make sure everything's up to code.
Exactly. And it's not just talk. They actually highlighted the safety record of those ADS-certified submersibles.
And what's that like?
It's impressive. Get this, there's never been a serious injury or fatality on an ABS-certified submersible.
Wow, really? So you're telling me it's safer to be in one of these things than it is to, like, cross the street?
Statistically speaking, probably. And even though there's no official classification for, like, underwater habitats like Poseidon, they still wanted to use those same super strict standards.
Okay, so points for safety. But let's talk about the elephant in the room for a second. What about the environmental impact? I mean, plunking a luxury resort down in the middle of the ocean can't be great for the ecosystem, right?
You'd think so, right? But that's where things get a little interesting.
Oh, how so?
Well, they actually claim that the Poseidon Resort would have a net positive impact on the environment.
Wait, hold on. They're saying building a whole luxury resort under the ocean is good for the environment. How?
Okay, so their argument is that the structure itself would basically become an artificial reef, which would then attract all kinds of marine life and boost biodiversity.
Okay, I see what they're going for, but it still feels a little weird to call it net positive. It's a luxury resort for rich people to vacation in, not like an ocean conservation center.
That's fair. And of course, there's always the question of unintended consequences.
Right, like what about the impact of the guests themselves? The noise pollution? What about waste disposal?
All valid concerns. And those are things they don't really address in this document.
It's like they got so caught up in this idea of creating an underwater utopia that they kind of glossed over some of the messier details.
Yeah, it's a classic case of dreams versus reality. And speaking of reality, we still haven't figured out why this whole thing never happened. We've talked about all these amazing plans, but something clearly went wrong.
Right. So what happened? Why isn't there a Poseidon Undersea resort welcoming guests as we speak? Seriously, what happened to this underwater paradise? We've seen the plans they had. It all mapped out the construction, the maintenance, the safety protocols. They even thought they were going to save the environment.
Right. But somewhere between those blueprints and a fully operational resort, something went wrong. And I think if we look closely, the document itself gives us some clues.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, remember how they were shooting for a 2011 opening?
Yeah, that always felt a little ambitious even back then.
Right, and this wasn't just some run-of-the-mill construction project. We're talking about an underwater city, something that had never been done before.
Yeah, the logistics must have been mind-boggling.
Exactly. And while they went into great detail about the cost of transporting the resort to Fiji, they even mentioned using a heavy lift ship to get it there.
A heavy lift ship? What's that?
Oh, it's basically a giant floating platform they use to move really massive structures like oil rigs or parts of bridges. Anyway, they talked about that whole process, but they were awfully quiet about the overall financial feasibility of the project.
Ah, so maybe money was the problem after all.
Money's always a factor. And let's be real, building underwater is not cheap.
Not to mention, we were in the middle of a global recession back in 2009. Not exactly the best time to be pitching an underwater luxury resort.
Exactly. Investors were probably a little hesitant to throw money at something so out there.
So a combination of financial hurdles and maybe a little bit of bad timing.
Probably. And you know, there's another factor they might not have fully considered.
What's that?
The fickle nature of the tourism industry itself. What if the demand for an underwater vacation wasn't as high as they thought?
Or maybe something newer and shinier came along and stole their thunder.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that even the best laid plans can be sunk by forces outside your control.
It really makes you think, what other incredible projects are out there just waiting for their moment? Or maybe just waiting for someone to say, you know what, that's a little too crazy even for us.
That's the question, isn't it? Where's the line between ambitious and impossible?
Well, I guess that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But it's certainly given us all a lot to think about.
It has. And who knows, maybe someday someone will pick up where Poseidon left off and make those underwater dreams a reality.
Until then, we'll just have to keep exploring the wonders of the world from above the surface.
Sounds good to me.